Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars on another. Again, I'm not going to rant about the weather, but the humidity is just this absolute soupy curtain of shit that is fogging up my glasses and making me so miserable. I just don't want to continue, but I'm going to. And we're going to do, again, kind of a short take on this car. This is a 2002 Cadillac Eldorado ETC. It's essentially the last of the Cadillac Eldorados. I mean, this particular car isn't the last one, but the 02 was. It was the last of the traditional Cadillac. In fact, it was the last of the personal luxury coupe, really, not just the Eldorado. The SUVs essentially killed them. The Eldorado's sister cars and competition had already died by the time this thing was made, long gone. The Toronado died in 1992. The Riviera assumed room temperature in 99. And even its arch rival, the Lincoln Mark series, died with the end run of the Mark 8 in 1998. So only the Cadillac remained. And even with no pure competition, it sold like shit. I mean, you know, everybody had moved on to the SUV fad by this point, and only a few traditional Cadillac buyers were left looking for the big personal luxury coupe. And as a result, this is the last of all. About 7,000, a little over that, 7,000 of these things were made, with the very last of them heading right to the Cadillac Museum. I mean, that's how antiquated they are, even when they came out. GM had planned to run them for another year, ending with the 03 model, which would give it a 50-year production run for the Eldo. But the bean counters apparently couldn't justify it, and that was it. It was killed a year early in 2002. Cadillac was heading in a new direction. They were funded by the Escalade SUV and using the art and I hate that foo-foo design language shit, but Cadillac loved it. So they used the art and science approach to make their new cars. And they'd be tested at German racetracks and, you know, flung around, the Nürburgring, instead of, you know, designed to be cruising the boulevards and looking good at the country clubs. And it just was a whole different world. The radically different XLR Roadster, in fact, would assume the Eldorado's place in the lineup in 2003. And that was more like a Mercedes SL, you know, than anything that had ever been a personal luxury car in the traditional American sense. So there it is. I mean, the loyal and faithful Cadillac personal luxury coupe buyer was told to suck it, basically. Either buy an SUV or just shut up. And it's just kind of sad. I mean, 12 generations of one of the proudest nameplates in automotive history, given kind of an ignoble end a year earlier than planned in a 10-year-old design. I mean, it's just an absolute shame, and it was no way to end the Eldorado name, in my opinion. I know there have been like a concept car or two since that, and Cadillac's talked about bringing back the Eldorado. I certainly hope they do, but you know, as it is now, it's just one of those things from the past that's gone, and Cadillac's building cars that are really fantastic in a lot of ways, but they're just not really Cadillacs. That's the only difference. So anyway, look, let's just get right into this one. It's on the front-wheel drive E-body platform, which it had been for some time, and it shared that with its sister cars, again, the Toronado and the Riviera. Those were the three sort of highest-end GM personal luxury coupes, and the thing cost $47,000 in 02, which is not cheap, but it was far less than a comparable Mercedes or BMW, and you did get a fair amount of bang for your buck, even if you got a car that would depreciate like you threw a rock off a cliff. So yeah, it's just one of those things. It was offered in ETC or ESC trims with a handful of ECSs thrown in. In long form, that's Eldorado Touring Coupe, like this one, Eldorado Sport Coupe, which was a little less sporty than the Touring Coupe, which is a little strange, and then just a handful of Eldorado Collector Series cars. The Collector Series was made in 3 batches of 532. signifying the first-year production number of the Eldorado in '53. It also had weird two-tone leather, which I think looked really strange, a numbered plaque on the dash, special carbon fiber interior trim, and an exhaust tuned to sound like the 1953 model. That's a little bit kitschy, and I have to say that I kind of appreciate it. But even with all that, still nobody bought them. I mean, you know, the traditional Eldorado buyer probably had oxygen tanks and, you know, nurses with them, and were in wheelchairs with blankets over their legs. I mean, they just sort of lived past their sell-by date, and the world had moved on while the Eldorado plugged on for a couple of more years. And oh, it's just kind of sad. You know, it's far from the design era that I love. I mean, I'm not a big fan of this. Actually is a '92 model, is when the 12th gen came out, and they just ran it for 10 years because they knew they weren't going to make any more after it. And it's not an era that I love at all. I mean, the '90s cars just had sort of this almost bland, egg-shaped approach to styling that I just don't appreciate, but there is some charm to it. Personally, though, I find it way too understated. It's big. It's bigger than it looks. In fact, this thing was 200 inches from bumper to bumper, which made it actually a couple of inches bigger than the short Cadillac Escalade, if you can believe that. It just looks smaller because there's really not much adorning it anywhere. And then it's got this weird sort of heavily raked small greenhouse with big saline quarter panel windows on it. Sorry, the windows are small. The quarter panel sides are actually quite large, so they managed to make what was actually a very big car look kind of small. And again, far from the design I like, but you know, if it's your era, you probably find it a little bit more attractive. Yeah, frankly, I also find the chrome-capped alloys to be a little bit strange. I cleaned those yesterday because I knew Dalton wouldn't. And I think it's odd that it's got, you know, alloy silver inside with chrome on the outside. I just think it looks a little bit peculiar, and frankly there's way too much sidewall for my taste. I think it could have benefited from having, you know, slightly bigger wheels. You see the quad tips in the back. The ETCs once had rectangular tips in '92 that I thought were pretty cool. They're just sort of quad Corvette-like at this point. You see the ETC logo. The first time they made an Eldorado Touring Coupe, well, that was actually in the '80s, and I'll post a link to that video. I was lucky enough to have one. They didn't make very many. But they didn't want to use the ETC name because who wants a car named Etc.? It just seems kind of strange. But they'd given up that worry by the time this one came out. And you can see it's got the monochromatic. It almost looks kind of sinister, particularly in black. You've got the ETC logo there. You've got sort of a blacked out Cadillac trunk lock. This would be all chrome on most Cadillacs of the past. Now it's black. You got your 32 valve North Star emblem. You have virtually no chrome on the side with the exception of the door window trim, although you don't have it on the back trim. You know, tech had caught up with the car, so they had to put this antenna on the back, which looks like one of these 80s cell phone things you'd have seen on the back of the limo. Probably lucky it doesn't have a boomerang antenna on the trunk. It does have frameless glass, which is a hearkening to, you know, earlier Eldorados, although the rear windows do not go down. Kind of an angled, swoopy hood. You know, Euro composite headlights up front, monochromatic bumper, monochromatic grille. The ETC didn't have a hood ornament. It had that wreath and crest in the grille. What can I say? I'm just not in love with the styling of the car. But there are some charms underneath, which we're going to get into. So look, I'm going to pause for a second there, and then we're going to get a little bit more in depth into this car. So bear with me one moment. Alright, so let's keep going. It is worth pointing out, this thing's going to be at that Mecum Kissimmee auction. It's one of the cars I'm running through. It's like the last car on Thursday. It's going to be going through and there's like, you know, two old guys who fell asleep in their seat in the audience and the janitor pushing cars around. So it's probably going to go cheap, which is wonderful. You can tell they love me at Mecum. But anyway, there it is. So that's where it's going to be. I look at this car and again, I see that 90s styling styling. And yeah, it's an '02, but it had been around since basically '92, this car. So the styling hadn't changed in a long time. And I'm just not an enormous fan. I mean, if I were to put it side by side with that 10th generation Eldo that I did the other day that I absolutely love, I mean, that thing has an impact. This thing pulls up and you'd think the guy's driving a Buick Century, and you can just tell the GM was at a bit of a crossroads at the time. But the car does have a lot of... Well, look, it's worth pointing out that mechanically this car packs a lot more tech and features than the outside suggests, and we'll sort of get into that as we go. It does earn its basically 50 grand price tag, but anyway, let's have a look inside the trunk. To do that, we're going to pop that with the remote. So you got a pretty damn big trunk. I mean, there's no question about that. It's enormous, and it has this giant and lovely infant containment net. I mean, look at this thing. If we had Sean's kid in there, he's going to fit no problem, and he's not getting out because he's going to get trapped in that, that net. It's almost like a gill net thing people fish with. I mean, he's going to be pawing at it. His fingers will get caught in there, and he is going to be safe and secure in that thing. I suppose you could also put some kind of cargo in there, and otherwise it does have tons of room. It has this factory mat to keep, if Sean's kid poops like he likes to do, then, it'll be saved by this mat. It won't go into your carpeting that's permanent with the car. And then under that, you have the spare tire jack and that sort of thing. So anyway, as it should, it being a Cadillac and the last person in luxury coupe, it does have a pretty damn big trunk. But you can also see Dalton did a kind of crappy job detailing. But anyway, let's have a look under the hood. Oh God, I'm dropping everything. All right, and here's where we get into what, GM was sort of building their tech during this time, and this car got quite a bit of it because, of course, the Eldorado still, at the end of it, would have been GM's or Cadillac's sort of flagship personal luxury coupe. So it's got the late generation North Star, where they finally worked most of the kinks out. In the ETC, it put out 300 horsepower, which is a pretty good figure for the time. And the car was actually pretty quick and responsive. So 32 valves, all aluminum, a true Cadillac engine. In a lot of ways, this is what a Cadillac is supposed to be. In many other ways, it just isn't. It runs through a 4T80E electronic 4-speed automatic, which is, GM's very good at building automatic transmissions, and the one in this car is no exception. It shifts smooth, nice, electronically controlled transmission that doesn't give you too many problems. Independent front and rear suspension, road sensing ABS brakes with 4-wheel discs, variable steering assist, StabiliTrak traction control. If again your Mr. Howell type gets a little bit loose and sideways running the back roads, that'll help him out with that. And then CVRSS. This thing has, which is continuously variable road sensing suspension. So basically it has, again, this is very high-tech shit. Even for '02, it had Delphi electronic suspension control that would actually sense the surface of the road and actually fed that to the ABS brakes, by the way. They were road sensing ABS brakes. But it would vary the dampening on the front and rear shocks to keep the car straight, level, and have the smoothest ride. And apparently it seems to work. I mean, I don't know how well maintained this car was, but with 95,000 miles, it rides and glides incredibly smooth, and I have to give the engineers at Delphi credit for that. And probably it seems to be a pretty reliable system, which is shocking. It's a shame it was too heavy to really handle. Even it's got front and rear sway bars and all that, but again, it just is a big, heavy Cadillac. It's not going to go around a corner very well, but it is a lot more like a BMW than those earlier Cadillacs that I prefer. Anyway, look, I tell you what, I'm going to get my crap in the trunk now, and then we're just going to hop in, go for a spin, and see what we got. So bear with me one moment. All right, so let's give this thing a go. You'd see it came from, I can't quite read it. It looks like Charlie Satter or something, you know, a Cadillac dealership out of Springfield. So, yeah, Illinois, I don't know, somewhere up there. Probably a fine dealership, but who the hell knows. The 83 I just had came from a dealership in Asheville, which is somewhere I'm not going to be terribly far from in a month, and I can't friggin' wait. You can see that weird, again, antenna. Oh, God, I don't know. The monochromatic sunken door handles. And we'll get into the inside. And if you look at this thing, you know, I mean, it's a nice place to be. There's no question about that. It's comfortable. It's chipper inside, but it's also kind of charmless. I mean, you can tell that Cadillac had been defeated by the European cars by the time this thing came out. And they were basically mimicking an earlier Mercedes-Benz, but without really the charm that the Benz had. It's sort of GM's interpretation of that. And, you know, again, that's why I say it had kind of an ignoble end. You get into the back seat, your Canadians are going to be pretty chipper. You got expanses of leather in there, nice padding. You got a center armrest. You can fit 3 if you want. You got 2 ashtrays, nice hearkening to an earlier time, and some kind of AC or vent controls in the back to make yourselves comfortable. You also got map pockets to put your drugs or narcotics, and everyone in the back seat, yeah, you know, if you're on your way to a Loverboy concert or whatever, you'll be reasonably chipper in the back of this thing. Door panel, you know, it's well formed. It looks nice. It uses all this soft material that, you know, is supposed to feel expensive, but GM obviously didn't time test for its ability to keep a form, because it all sort of peels back over time. Even 10 years of production, they didn't bother to worry about that too much, and that's so GM. You also have some map pockets. You see 6-way power seats up front with lumbar control, and they actually feel pretty nice. So let's hop in, fire this thing up, and get some AC going. And honestly, this is where you start to feel a little bit of charm, except for all the binging. Okay, I get it. Thank you. I'll put on my seatbelt, or whatever the hell you want. Anyway, this is where some of the charm starts to come in the car. Because, God, got the AC going here. Holy shit, is it hot? I don't even care if it sounds windy. It doesn't matter. But anyway, it's a comfortable place to be. Let me move my chair back a little bit. So you can see you've got this big instrument cluster that gives you... that's too loud. I'm going low. This big instrument cluster that gives you 150 mile an hour speedometer, which for all I know this thing is capable of, and I don't care. The red line is a little over 6, which is very sporty for a V8, but again, aluminum 32 valves. You got your water temp, you got your fuel, you got a driver information center there. Apply brake. I am applying the brake, and there it goes. And you can see the miles, and if you hit info, you start to get different stuff that you could pull up there. It has a, you know, fairly advanced trip computer with timers and battery volts and oil life and all that kind of shit. You got a tilt wheel, but not telescope. You got a very busy shaft here that gives you your wipers, you know, headlights, and well, not your full headlights, but your high beams, and, you know, whatever. A lot of controls there. Over there, you've got a nice little plastic cheapy insert for your Twilight. You know, I mean, this is such an affront to the bling of the earlier Cadillacs that they came. You know, if you're gonna become a Mercedes, at least up your materials a little bit, and don't have a headlight control that looks like it belongs in a Chevy Lumina. Over here you got your power window controls, your power locks, your mirror, your seat memory. You got your seat controls on the side of the seat. Real Zebrano wood, which is absolutely beautiful, but again mimics an earlier Mercedes. Get over here, you've got top buttons with all your, info resets, trips, your climate control stuff. You can also open your fuel or trunk. This radio is quite advanced for the time. CD, cassette, also a changer in the trunk. And it would give you real-time traffic information, weather. It would even interrupt a CD or tape for an emergency alert. Let's see what we have on the radio. Nothing. I've had enough Tom Petty. Down here, your automatic climate control with differentiation for the passenger. You got a nice Zebrano wood center console with your, again, very Mercedes-like. I mean, this is such a take on the 126 cars, the Zebrano panel flat with your heater controls. It's got two settings, by the way. There's these heater controls for the seats. Too hot and hotter. You got a little cup holder thing in there. You've got a center console here to put some cassettes or CDs or drugs or guns. In here you got your glove box where you can put on your valet mode, turn off your traction control. What else is in there? What's this thing? Extra fuses. What an odd little place to put them. Up here you have a self-dimming mirror with a compass. It also has OnStar, which uses a 2G network, so it no longer works. A garage door opener, which was an option, and GM's Astra roof, which is a nice giant glass power sunroof. So at least it's got that, and that's nice. You also have a couple of cocaine mirrors up here, which seem to be working all right. Yeah, they work pretty good, and you got these sliders to sort of get the part that the sun might sneak through. And, they did put a lot of tech in this thing, even if it isn't immediately. You also have these, I kind of like these paddle, they're not for the transmission, obviously, because we don't have sporting types, but you can adjust your fan speed up or down, or high and low. That's all nice stuff. Your temperature up or down. Volume for the radio, and I don't know what this does. Yeah, this changes the different patterns and presets. So anyway, all very nice stuff. Let me get this back down again, low speed, and let's go for a spin. And honestly, this is where the charm of this car starts to come into play, because it drives very nice. It's a smooth driving car, and obviously that Delphi suspension is still working pretty good, and it's designed to give you what you need when you need it. When you're just floating down the boulevard, it gives you a boulevard ride, and when you need a little bit of sport, it stiffens up. When your nose is diving, it pumps up the front. When your ass is diving, it pumps up the rear, and it does what it's supposed to do. The steering response is good. It has that very fancy sort of road sensing, variable speed, power assist. To me, it's an absolute miracle that all of this still seems to be working at 95,000 miles. So I'll give GM a little bit of credit for that one. And you do have this sort of comfy, big car, boulevard ride feel that personal luxury coupe guys would have demanded, and they would have gotten it in 02 if any of them had bothered to go out and buy the friggin' thing, which apparently none of them did. I mean, 7,000 copies for an Eldorado. They were all buying Escalades or, whatever the hell their wives told them to buy at the time. But anyway, it's a nice driving car, and frankly, I think they do represent a little bit of a bargain in the collector world. And the fact that you get a pretty good one for well under 10 grand. They're lovely cars to drive around, and, they are the end of an era. The end of an era that I loved, by the way, so it's just sad to see what became of it. That North Star has some pep. I remember when I worked at the Buick dealership in 02, it was also a Caddy dealership. I wasn't part of it, but they had it. And we drove some of those V8 and then North Star cars. We were surprised that they would let, these 80-year-old guys have that kind of horsepower. It seemed a bit dangerous. But anyway, the thing goes down the road lovely. Nice wood wheel. This is the only, to me, charming part of the car, is that it has such a nice, smooth, lovely ride. And I don't care if it handles. I don't care if it, you know, does the crazy maneuver. None of that matters to me. It's just a nice, smooth boulevard ride, and that's what a Cadillac should be. And I suppose that's befitting enough for the last of the real personal luxury coupes. So anyway, there it is. Thank you for having a look. Really appreciate it. Heading up to Mecum next week, so I probably won't get a video out, but maybe. We'll see. I might get one Monday or Wednesday. I'll try, but no promises. And otherwise, when I get back, we'll keep rolling forward. So take care, appreciate it, and we will see you with the next one.